Are you ready? Asked Sheila, and without waiting for my answer, she got down to business. I missed it, she smiled, and a strange sound interrupted my thoughts. Sheila's smile turned into a mocking laugh, and her image faded. I am fully awake, the dream, as always, is gone. It turned out that the noise was as if someone was knocking on my front door. I got out of bed, put on my dressing gown and headed for the door. Mr. Slimane, open up. It's the police, demanded the voice as I approached. When I opened the door, I was greeted by 4 men, 2 in police uniforms and one whom I did not recognize. Martin Slimane, I'm Detective Sergeant Moon, said a plainclothes man I didn't know, showing his arrest certificate. Can we come in? I'd like to talk. I'd seen enough cards to know it was real, but I asked him to take another look just to make him a little angry. I didn't know what these guys wanted, but I didn't do anything wrong. Okay, what's that about? I asked, putting the kettle down and leading them into the kitchen. If you don't mind, I'll ask questions, DS Moon replied sternly. Okay, but I won't answer until my lawyer is here. Do you have anything to hide, Mr. Slimane? My instincts worked. I had known Douglas Collins, another officer, for many years. He always called me Marty. The use of Mr. Slimane was a bad sign. No, but I feel outnumbered here. If you're going to ask me questions, I need to know what you're talking about. It's not every day that I wake up in. I looked at my watch. 5 in the morning. What's so urgent? I'm investigating your wife's accident. What kind of accident? Your wife was involved in the incident last night. I need to know where you were around 11 p.m. I was here, alone. Is my ex-wife seriously injured? She is in intensive care, but her condition is stable. Where's your Range Rover? Do you mean I'm involved in this? Your ex-wife and Mr. Anthony Pride were walking down Finchley Road around 11 p.m. when a Range Rover pulled onto the sidewalk and hit your wife. He let Mr. Pride pass. He claims that this was a deliberate attempt. The car fled the scene. Now I'd like to take a look at your Range Rover. You'll have to wait. It's in Roland's garage for a gearbox replacement. I've been there all week. DS Moon exchanged glances with 2 uniformed officers, who then left, presumably to check out the garage. Can you prove that you were here last night, Mr. Slimane? This is good. How the hell am I supposed to prove that I was alone in my apartment? The definition of loneliness means that I didn't have anyone here to vouch for me, did it? Well, in that case, I'll ask you to go down to the station and help me with my questions. Sure. But you wouldn't mind if I called my brief first and got dressed later, would you? I called my lawyer, who was not very pleased that he was called at this time in the morning, and then got dressed. As we were leaving the apartment, I happened to notice Mrs. Cummings, our local nosy Parker, who was watching us pass by her kitchen window. Since her husband had died a few years before, Mrs. Cummings had had nothing to do but watch the comings and goings of her neighbors. I turned to Doug Collins. If you talk to the old witch, she'll probably give you a detailed list of my movements for the whole week. Nothing passes her by, no matter the time of night. DC Collins and DC Moon exchanged glances. Then Collins returned and knocked on the old woman's door. The DS Moon and I continued to their car. After sitting there for a while, DC Collins emerged from the apartment building, and Mooney approached him to meet him. They had a lively conversation for a few moments, then DC Collins came up to me. To be honest, Doug Collins wasn't really the bad guy. At school, we got along well with each other. But I'm afraid we've had a few run-ins with each other since he took up his chosen profession. The old lady says you can't get out of your apartment between 8 o'clock when you get home and 2 o'clock in the morning when you go to bed. The old lady does not go to bed while all the neighbors have gone to bed? If I know, but she likes her a little gossip. I suppose you learned the story about her in room 22. The old witch believes that she is in the game while her old man is at sea. Yes, I have a chapter and a verse on this topic. In any case, the sergeant thinks that the old woman's words knock you out of the frame. Mind you, he'll still be pretty damn good at your car. This is his prerogative, but he will find everything to hell. In any case, what hospital is Sheila in? I'd like to check it out. Royal, I'm afraid she's in a bad position, Marty. She is in the intensive care unit. They are not sure whether it will survive or not. You realize that we have to treat this like murder until we know for sure which way the cookies are crumbling, and that with this last little fiasco between you and Sheila, we had no choice but to investigate your whereabouts. Don't worry, I understand that you have a job. Now I go back upstairs to shave and then go down there. Marty, you're still fixated on this woman, aren't you? What do you think, Doug? You've known us for a long time. But she left you for that slippery jerk Tony Pride, didn't she? To be honest, Doug, I don't know how it all started. But you know me, as soon as I got out of the stroller, I didn't listen to any explanation and blew up my top. I thought she divorced you. She did so, but she never had a choice. I climbed the wall and threatened to kill her in pride. I guess that's what made your DS chase here so quickly. Not really. It's the Pride A pointing the finger at you. Look, I think we'll need to talk about all of that later, if you don't mind. I'll be at the Plow around 6 in the evening. I usually eat there as soon as the kitchen opens. I'll try to get there tonight. I'd better go now. The sergeant becomes impatient. He hadn't eaten breakfast yet. Oh, what was his plan? Let me sweat in the cell while he eats breakfast? Not far off, but since you haven't been charged, he probably left you waiting in the interrogation room for an hour or so. I watched the officers leave and then went back to my apartment to call and let him know he wouldn't be needed at the hospital, and then prepare for my visit to the hospital. Sheila and I met in a bar about 12 years ago. The guy she was with was apparently one of those guys who, after drinking a few pints, think he's the king of the world and are looking for a piece. But he had started a fight with the wrong guy, someone very small, whom he thought he could easily handle. It may have been half cut, but it wasn't that stupid. His trouble was that he was harassing a guy whose brothers were in another bar. Everything could have been very confusing if the governor hadn't rushed to call the police. In any case, after the local police took her on a date, I, being the gentleman that I am, and with an eye on chance, offered Sheila a ride home. Well, we never actually went straight home. We stopped at another pub for a quiet drink to calm Sheila's nerves a little. From then on, we dated for several months until she entered the university. It was 4 years later, and I was playing best man at a friend's wedding. Who should appear as a bridesmaid if not Sheila? Now everyone knows that the bridesmaid must be looked after by the best man. So, the next thing you know, Sheila and I wake up in the morning in the same bed. Heck, I was too angry to remember our first night together. While I remember Roger killing one of the other bridesmaids earlier in the evening, Sheila must have been playing as hard as she could to get started. I think she expected me to wait for her while she was at uni. But since I had heard that she was playing on the field up there, I had no intention of being made a fool of. Anyway, let's get down to business. Sheila and I got married 6 months later, when she was 4 months pregnant. I think we were very happy together. I'll say I because you can never tell exactly what other people think, can you? All you can be sure of is the feelings in your own heart. Sadly, we lost our little Katie at 3 months old. They said that the syndrome of death in the cradle. It's just a way of saying that we don't know why your baby died. The problem is that there will always be people who will make up their own minds about what happened and gossip behind your back. Sheila's cycle went potty after little Katie went. We tried really hard for the next few years, but Sheila just didn't get pregnant again. The doctor prescribed her pills to regulate her cycle, but this, of course, did not greatly affect the child's plans. However, she was able to hold on to her job after taking the pills, which she had many problems with over the years. It is assumed that the PMT will last only a couple of days. When Sheila's cycle went upstream, her cycle could last a couple of weeks at a time. At home, too, it was happier, due to the fact that her cycle went haywire. Home life was sometimes not very pleasant. Well, everything calmed down for about 3 years. Then the topic of children arose again. We believed that the pills could solve Sheila's cycle problem, and if she stopped treating them, then with any luck, things should be back to normal. The best plans of mice and humans. Yes, Sheila's periods were now at regular intervals. But we still had no luck in childbedding. However, these things can take time. One afternoon, I came home from work and Sheila wasn't home yet. She was always home before me. I started making dinner. Well, I tried it, but I'm not very good at old cooking. After wandering around the kitchen like a lost sheep for half an hour or so, I ran to an old stand and called the local Chinese to deliver takeaway. By 7 o'clock the Chinese arrived, but Sheila was still here to be seen. I have to say that by now I've started to get very worried. After all, you read some strange stories in the newspapers these days. I called her office, but the security guard said they had all left a few hours ago. I started calling her friends from work. Fortunately, we had one of those personal phone books handy, and Sheila had written down everyone's numbers in it. I couldn't get a response from any of her coworkers. So I assumed she must have stopped to have a drink with them after work. But it was already 9 o'clock. Well, it was 11:30 when the taxi stopped on the street, and a very noisy Sheila staggered out, shouting goodnight to her friends. I took a higher position, sitting in the kitchen waiting for her to arrive. I guess I should point out here that we tended to use the kitchen door as the main entrance. This is how the house was planned when they converted it from a barn. This is the door closest to the road. Maybe I overdid it with contempt on my face, I'm not sure. But when Sheila walked in the door, she looked at me, and then before I could really play the role of an annoyed husband, she just said, I have the right to go out for drinks with my friends once in a while. And then she turned, I suppose, with the intention of going through the door that led to the hall and the stairs to the bedroom. Unfortunately, Sheila opened the door to the basement instead, and then quickly walked down the stairs. No matter how hard I tried to be quick, I couldn't get there in time when I saw Sheila turn the wrong way. Did I shout a warning to her? I really couldn't remember, I just saw her disappear through the basement door. The ambulance arrived surprisingly quickly, and Sheila was taken to the victims. Fortunately, Sheila did not break a single bone. The doc said it was most likely because she was drunk. Something related to the relaxation of the body. But she got a nasty bump on her head and suffered from a concussion, so they left her for observation. What I couldn't understand was her attitude towards me that night. But then I didn't like what one of the doctors told me. He asked if Sheila and I had a habit of taking recreational drugs. I said that none of us could take any drugs under any circumstances. He only raised his eyebrows and turned away. Look, I never kept my mouth shut. I asked him to clarify why he asked this question, but he didn't want to. The next day, when I came to see Sheila in the hospital quite late, as I had not slept most of the night, Detective Constable Douglas Collins was leaving her room with me. He just greeted me and continued walking, passing by. When I asked Sheila what he was doing there, she said she was investigating her accident. But Sheila didn't seem to remember the previous day at all. That night after I got home, I got a call from D.C. Collins. I was to give him a chapter and a verse about the events of the previous day. He carefully examined the kitchen and the stairs to the basement. I had to show him where I was sitting. I pointed to the security monitor on which I watched Sheila return home. Then I found and played the part of the video where Sheila was coming home so he could see and hear her, getting out of the taxi, and staggering toward the house. After that, he did something that seemed strange to me. He asked me to go out the door and scream. I could never figure out what that meant, but it gave him some time in the house alone. After he asked me to go back inside, he asked me to play a video of Sheila coming home. Only this time he asked me to let him work a little more. I was surprised that not only could you hear me yelling at Sheila that she was going through the wrong door, but also her scream as she fell. He left, apparently satisfied that it was an accident. He stubbornly refused to explain to me why he thought it was something else. The next day, when I visited Sheila in the hospital, I saw Tony Pride for the first time. As I walked down the hallway, several of her friends from work were coming out of her room. Later I found out that one of them was Tony Pride. When I walked into her room, Sheila told me that the doctor had told her that she could go home, but she would have to calm down a bit. I helped her get dressed and then drove her home. Of course, I wanted to know why she hadn't contacted me to let me know that she was going to meet her friends. But she claimed that she did not remember the day of the accident at all, so she could not tell me anything. What really upset me was her attitude when she got home that night. I never stopped her from meeting friends, just as she didn't mind when I went out for drinks with guys. But we always let each other know what was going on, so we didn't have to worry. Over the next few months, everything went as usual, but I noticed that the distance between us was greater than usual. Listen, it's never been so normal. Sheila's strange PMT symptoms, as I said, lasted longer than most people. Yes, and her cycle slowly spun again. But this time it was definitely different. Only I could not understand what the cause of the problem was. Yes, it would be easy to blame PMT, but somehow I wasn't convinced. Sheila spent more evenings with her friends and treated me in a very strange way. Don't ask, I can't explain it. But she showed a keen interest in who exactly I drank with when I walked with the boys, and where we went. A couple of times she appeared in a pub with one of her friends. Looking back, I should have suspected something, but since her friend Amy, whom she usually took with her, was nice to one of my buddies, I didn't pay attention to it. I just assumed it was an old matchmaker. It must have been 8 months since Sheila's accident. One evening I came home from work and was greeted by DC Collins and a couple of other officers. They asked me to accompany them to the station to help them with their questions. They told me that if I refused, they would arrest me. In the shrewd room, the detective inspector, whom I did not know, questioned me again about the accident that had happened to Sheila on the stairs in the basement. For several hours, he went over the events of that evening over and over again. After 16 hours of interrogation, they suddenly told me that I could go home. When I got home, I was completely shocked to learn that Sheila had moved out of the house. No explanation or anything like that. I tried to call her on her mobile phone. We joined the yuppie cell phone after our last fiasco, which meant we could communicate with each other wherever we were. But her phone was turned off. The next day, I was standing on the road from her office when Sheila finished work. She came out with one of her colleagues. I began to approach her to ask what the hell was going on. But as I got closer, Tony Pride showed up and hugged her. I could see now that Pride had seen me coming, but I'm sure Sheila and her friend had no idea I was there. Sheila made a movement to push his hand away, which I noticed, but I didn't remember it at the time. I was angry and didn't think very clearly. Sheila, I need to talk to you, I said, getting close enough. She has nothing to talk to you about, Pride said, stepping between us. Get lost, you asshole. I'm talking to my wife. What happened next was more of a farce than anything else. The Pride took a classic boxing stance and started bouncing like he was Cassius Clay or something. I warn you, I'm an amateur boxer, he announced. Go to hell, I'm very scared. No, Tony, stay away from that. He's going to kill you, said Sheila, obviously trying to force Pride to back down. But Pride didn't want that and came closer. I guess he was planning to humiliate me. He pointed his left jack at my face, probably planning to follow the cross, when I noticed that his right hand was moving back. Unfortunately for him, his left fist found my hand waiting for him. Grabbing his fist, I turned him to the left, and he was forced to turn with him. We all heard something happen when I kicked him in the left leg, just below the knee, and he collapsed into a pile. You bastard! Sheila shouted to me, kneeling down next to the not-so-proud Pride, who was rolling on the floor in pain. Well, he asked for it himself. And you were supposed to be a big guy and break his bloody knee? What the hell was I supposed to do, let him hit me? You shouldn't be here. I don't want to see you anymore, and I certainly don't want to marry the man who tried to kill me. What the hell are you talking about? I have never done anything that could harm you. Oh, yes? Well, I went through therapy, and it helped me remember what happened the night you threw me down the stairs. The conversation stopped there when 2 policemen grabbed me from behind. I didn't hear them come. They handcuffed me and pushed me into the back of the meat van. In the hospital, I was accused of assault and battery, and then pushed into a cell. You may have already understood why cops aren't my favorite people. In any case, I called a local criminal defense lawyer. In the past, he represented several of my acquaintances. It didn't take long for him to get me out. Unfortunately for Pride, security cameras closed the street outside Sheila's office. Foolishly, I did not charge him with assault. In the video, although there was no sound, I could definitely see him attacking me. After that, I tried a couple of times to reason with Sheila, but to no avail. The situation reached a critical point when one evening some of the boys and I went to a restaurant to eat. We'd been there for a while when anyone could have peeked if not Sheila and her best friend, Amy. He was followed by Pride and some other guy. The Pride was still limping a little and was using his cane. They didn't notice how we were sitting in our corner when we sat down at the table. Pridey sits across from Sheila. There was nothing of a cute pigeon about the way they behaved with each other, but I was really infuriated to see them together. The boys managed to keep me under control, as we finished the meal rather hastily. The plan was for us to leave quietly, but Pride couldn't hold back his bloody mouth when he saw me. As loud as he could, he said, "Right now, Sheila, my love, what would you like for your beloved?" It was so loud that it was obvious that it was meant for my ears. I changed direction to walk past their table. The expression on Pride's face changed from belligerence to one of alarm. As I approached the table, I stopped and, bending over so that I wouldn't have to speak too loudly myself, said to them, "If any of you try to embarrass me in public again, I won't be responsible for my actions. Now, Sheila, if you want to live with that ass, file for divorce like any civilized person, and don't try to make up lies to put me in jail." I didn't know. Marty, that's not what it sounds like. I didn't hear anymore, as I was out of earshot. As we got into the car, one of my friends told me that Sheila's friend Amy had followed us and was standing on the sidewalk shouting my name. I just told the guy who was driving to drive on. A few weeks later, my lawyer informed me that he had heard from Sheila's lawyers. The divorce took place a few months later. Our beautiful home has been sold and our assets are divided equally. Since there were no children and, apparently, Sheila was remarried, there was no discussion of alimony. Well, she didn't ask for anything. So we go back to where we were a little over a year after the divorce. Sheila was in the hospital again and the police suspected that I was somehow involved. When I got to the hospital, I was surprised to find that Sheila was registered as Slimane. I thought she'd already married this jerk. After I introduced myself to the nurse, she took me to the room and asked me to wait for the doctor. "Mr. Slimane," asked the doctor as he entered the room. "It's me. Sorry, I'm confused. There used to be a man here who said he was Mrs. Slimane's fiancé." "It may well be. I haven't seen Sheila in over a year. I am her ex-husband. But you remember the vows, in sickness and in health, for the better for the worse, and all that shit. Just because we divorced doesn't mean I don't worry about her." "Humph, it's a bit unusual, but apart from her fiancé, there seems to be no other relatives." "That's right, as far as I know, Sheila has no other relatives. She was orphaned a few years ago before I met her. I don't know how we're going to go further, but it doesn't hurt if I tell you. And we will need someone to help us with the forms of liberation. Her fiancé tells us that she is one of Jehovah's Witnesses. But in fact, we need to operate on her, the sooner the better. Her fiancé says she would not agree to invasive surgery, but without it, she will die." Jehovah's Witnesses? What the hell are you talking about? Sheila isn't religious, and she couldn't have changed that much. No, wait a minute, I know it's not. I saw her friend last week, and I'm sure she'd tell me if Sheila suddenly became interested in religion. Give me a minute and I'll talk to Sheila's best friend Amy. I'm surprised she's not here. I took out my cell phone to call Amy. She would have known whether the joke of Jehovah's Witnesses was true or not. But the doctor stopped me and told me to turn off the phone and use the landline. Then I called Sheila's office. Amy was shocked to hear that Sheila had been in an accident. I asked her why Tony Pride didn't tell everyone in the office, and she informed me that Tony wasn't working there anymore. When I mentioned a Jehovah's Witness, Amy was shocked and said that there was no way it could be true. I told the doctor, who was still waiting, and he asked me if I could get Amy quickly to the local magistrate's court. Then the doctor and I went to court ourselves, but in a police car. Amy came just like us. We were escorted to the office, where we found Tony Pride and a guy I thought was a lawyer. Apparently, they were trying to convince the judge to issue an order that Sheila should not undergo invasive surgery. It was obvious that the judge did not like this idea. As soon as Amy and I expressed our opinions, he gave the doctor the authority to do what he thought was in the patient's best interest until she could make those decisions for herself. The doctor immediately called the hospital, and by the time we got there, Sheila was at the theater. Strangely, when we left the courthouse, Tony Pride was nowhere to be found. I was sitting in the waiting room when Doug Collins came in. "I see you never made it to the pub. I thought you were still here." "Lord, what the hell is the time?" I asked. 7:30. "Bastard. Where's the damn phone?" Amy said, running out of the room. "I suppose I need to call someone and make a date." "How is she?" Colin asked. "Still in the theater, she's been there for hours." "Damn, I hope she can handle it for you." "Thank you, Doug. What did you want to talk about?" "Well, you know what they say about the copper nose. That was what the old lady told me this morning. I'm pretty sure someone tried to set you up for last night's fall. Last night, your curious neighbor noticed a couple of times the same Range Rover as yours pulling into the parking lot near your apartment. He was there twice, once around 10:30, and then again around 11:30, and the second time he showed up, he only had one headlight working. I have a feeling that whoever was driving played dirty. If he had passed any video cameras on his way to the accident site, he would have appeared at the right time on the right cameras going in both directions. I suspect they expected your car to be parked in the parking lot, and they would likely have smashed your headlight to match the damage on the Range Rover that hit Sheila." "But why?" "Wait, I'm not done yet. You remember when Sheila fell down the stairs last year? I came and talked to you. Well, we acted on an anonymous tip. I'll give you one guess where this tip came from." I must have looked embarrassed. "Telephone box in the foyer of Sheila's office building. We know it was a guy because it was recorded. And guess what time it was made? Right after half a dozen of them returned from visiting Sheila. I think she told them that she didn't remember what had happened the day before, and one of them decided to play some prank. Well, from that day on, I had a good idea of who it was, but I couldn't figure out why. Of course, the fact that you knocked it didn't help anyone. Do you think Pre-Dye decided to separate Sheila and me? I'm damn sure he did it. What better way to separate a couple than to make her believe that her husband tried to kill her?" At that moment, Amy returned. "Well, I guess he wanted Sheila to divorce and not marry so he could marry her." "He might want to marry Sheila." "But she doesn't want to marry him," Amy said with an uncharacteristic tone in her voice. "But they're engaged," I said. "For him, but not for her. She meets him in society, but that's all. I don't think they even kissed each other, let alone anything else. He asked her to marry him more than once, but she had trouble accepting. He tells everyone they're engaged, but sometimes Sheila really taunts him because of it. I don't understand. What is her problem?" You drag your head. "She's in love with you." "Speak clearly, Amy." "Sheila divorced me, remember?" "Yes, because she likes to live. Sheila has been in a real mess for the last year or so, ever since you started playing with that girl. Sheila knew you wanted to get her out of the way so you could marry the mother of your children." "What the hell are you talking about now? I haven't played with anyone, and I definitely don't have any little bastards." "Well, that's what Sheila believes, because someone put the idea in her head that you have a girlfriend somewhere, and she's convinced that you tried to kill her. I know she was very embarrassed that you didn't move in with a girl." "Amy's right, you know, Marty," Doug added, "and I think it was Tony Pride who put these ideas into Sheila's head. I'm pretty sure it was Tony Pride who accused you of throwing her down the stairs. It was Tony Pride who attacked you outside the office that night, and it was Tony Pride who claimed that you were driving that Range Rover last night. But what is this guy up to? Assuming that he was the one who orchestrated this so-called accident last night, what the hell were his motives for trying to kill her? Of course, it couldn't be, because she didn't want to marry him. I know it doesn't make any sense. But that's what we have to find out. Find a motive, and you'll usually solve the crime. Be that as it may, with all this farce about Sheila being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, he certainly showed his hand. It seems to me that he wants Sheila dead for some reason," Doug said. "Let's start from the beginning. The first one. He or someone else implants the idea in Sheila's head that you have a little on the side. They added a few children to make it look like a long-term affair. 2. Someone convinces Sheila that her fall down the stairs while intoxicated was not an accident. Oh, by the way, you know that Sheila didn't have enough alcohol in her blood that night to be convicted of drunk driving. This is nonsense. She could barely get up. Well, that's not what the blood tests they took here showed. The problem is that they left it too late to find out what else might have been in her blood that night. The doctor thought she had taken what he called a recreational drug. But it can mean anything. What? Do you think Pride drugged her? Do you think he was there after putting her to bed that night? I asked. Oh, it wasn't Tony who had those ideas, Amy interjected. It was his friend. Look, we all went to the pub for a drink that night to celebrate the birthday of one of the other girls. Around 7 o'clock some of us went up the road to buy something to eat. Sheila did not come with us, she said she would go home when she had finished drinking. Anyway, when we got back to the pub around 9, Sheila was dancing on the floor. To be honest, she was not at ease. I had never seen her dance like that before, as if she couldn't stop. Just after 11, the drink seemed to hit her, and she almost fainted. That Bob, or whoever he was, said he'd take her home. Oh, yes, and you can see how we let that happen when Sheila was drunk as a skunk. The girls and I insisted that she go with us in our taxi. This guy with Bob wasn't too happy about it, but we were adamant, and then Tony stepped in and told him to leave it. Let's do this 3. What would your reaction be if Sheila woke up in someone else's bed in the morning, Marty? Don't tell me, guess. That plan didn't work, so when our friend finds out that Sheila was in an accident and can't remember what happened, he points the finger at you. But Sheila remembered the psychopath she went to. He was the doctor who hypnotized her, and she remembered. Amy exclaimed. Oh yes, I got a report on those allegations, Doug said. Look, I was in that kitchen the next day. None of what Sheila said was right. If there had been a fight that Sheila claimed to have. Look, the room just wasn't there unless half of the furniture was broken, which it wasn't. And here is that door to the cellar, it opens outward. How the hell could Marty push her through that? Remember that there were no marks, no damage, nothing. In addition, the security camera is right outside the back door. The microphone would pick up any screams or screams. All he caught was Marty shouting a warning to Sheila and her screaming as she fell. No, I'm damn sure that Sheila opened the door herself and walked in, thinking it was the door to the hall. Have you ever heard of the planted memories, Amy? Well, I suspect it was done to Sheila somehow, the charlatan or anyone else who hypnotized her. Her story did not correspond to the facts, as far as I know them. Do you have any idea who the therapist she went to was? I think with someone Tony knew, Amy said. You see, Tony pried again. But what is this faggot up to? Doug asked, looking at me. Well, if I know, it drives me crazy. If he wanted to steal my wife, why the hell would he try to kill her? Maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Suppose Tony Pride wants Sheila dead all the time, Doug suggested. But why does he want to separate her from me in the first place? I asked. That's what we have to decide, Marty. Doug leaned back in his chair, obviously thinking. Amy, who looked very thoughtful, suddenly asked, Marty, could Sheila have relatives with money? It's not like I know about it. Why? Look, I'm guessing here. But what if Sheila is going to inherit a lot of money from some relative you didn't even know existed? You know, a long-lost aunt or something. Look, it's all a little bit from Agatha Christie, I know, but I love her books. Now, let's imagine for a moment that Tony Pride is also associated with this unknown benefactor, but a little further, so if Sheila dies, he'll inherit. Now, if Sheila died while married to you, even if she didn't know she inherited the money, it would go to you as hers. But if you divorced before she received the inheritance, it will not go to you. It will go to the next of kin in the queue. And I bet I can guess who it turns out to be. But why did they try to frame me for last night's accident? Because you can't legally benefit from a crime in this country, even if you could prove that whoever the money came from died and left it to Sheila before you got divorced. If you killed her, you still wouldn't be able to inherit the money. We both sat and looked at Doug. It's far-fetched, I'll tell you, but it definitely fits the script. I'll go back to Nick to see what I can dig up about our Mr. Anthony Pride, and while I'm at it, Marty, give me Sheila's maiden name, and do you know where she was born? Smith, her maiden name was Sheila Smith. But I have no idea where she was born. She was never very open about her childhood. All I can tell you is that she is an orphan. But her birth certificate must be somewhere. I'll need to find him if I can. I think we should have a copy at home. I don't remember her taking it with her. I'll take a look and dig it up later. That's right. If you don't hear from me first, please call me on my mobile phone, that's the number, Doug said. He gave me the card and left the room. Amy and I sat alone for another hour before one of the doctors came to see us. The operation was over. Sheila had a fractured skull and had many cerebral hemorrhages. We realized that they had some difficulty stopping the bleeding. I wouldn't say the doctor was pessimistic, but he was annoyed that Tony Pride postponed the operation with all this nonsense about Sheila being the mind of Jehovah. Given the way trials are currently going, they needed to get a judge's permission before they could proceed as soon as they were told to do so. He said the prognosis is good, but not very good. They kept Sheila under the effects of sedatives for the next few days while they waited for her brain swelling to subside. Amy and I went to visit her, but all we could see were bandages and tubes going everywhere. You know, you've all seen these cars beeping on TV. The doctors told us that Sheila had many broken bones, but they were worried about her head injuries. Amy and I left the hospital together and went to eat at the nearest fish and chip store. I drove Amy home and she asked me to pick her up and take her back to the hospital in the morning. She wasn't going back to work until she was sure Sheila was okay. At home, I searched our files for Sheila's birth certificate, but I couldn't find it. And then it dawned on me. None of our papers were there. There was no marriage certificate, no nisi decree, and no old passport for Sheila. I gave it to my current lawyer when he asked for it. But I was sure that he did not ask her for other papers. Yes, I played stupid pederastics during the divorce. If Sheila didn't ask, she didn't get it. Well, when you play with a losing hand, any small win makes you feel a little better. I didn't sleep well that night. Damn, I don't think I slept at all. Amy and I returned to the hospital at 8 o'clock. But nothing had changed in Sheila's condition. Tony Pride also did not appear again. I called my office and told them that I wouldn't be coming for a while. They didn't mind, which is the advantage of doing a good job. They didn't want to lose me. Doug Collins reappeared about 10:30. I noticed that DS Moon had come with him this time, but he stayed away from me except when he came up to me to ask how Sheila was doing. He had already spoken to the doctor, so I think he was trying to build a bridge. Doug said they couldn't find Tony Pride. Well, not the Tony Pride we all knew. Whoever he was, he stole someone else's identity. Tony Pride, who was mentioned in his documents, was that he lived in Australia. The address at which he used was a rented room in one of the houses. Apparently, they saw him only once a week when he picked up his mail. Everything that was known about him was a lie. 2 weeks passed, and Amy and I sat by Sheila's bed all day every day. One morning, Doug Collins came and told us that he had managed to find Sheila's now deceased great-uncle. Apparently, the guy had several £1,000,000 that Sheila was supposed to inherit. It turned out that she was orphaned much earlier than I thought. She was adopted, and her new parents changed their surname. Doug was at their place, and they told him that she hadn't taken the stories of being adopted very well. An abyss formed between them, and she actually ran away. They hadn't seen or heard of her since she was 18. Once they ended up in the hospital, but they did not stay there for long. They must have been upset to see her in such a state. I told them that I would let them know when she regained consciousness. They thanked me and said they would be back. One of the nurses told me that after that, they called 3 times a day to report on the progress. 4 weeks after the accident, the situation changed slightly. Some of the bandages were gone, but we were still sitting listening to the monotonous beep of the heart monitor. One of the machines that recorded Sheila's brain activity showed signs that made the medical staff optimistic. But they didn't mean much to us. By then, Amy and I were back to work. We had our mouths in turns. I sat with Sheila one day, Amy the next day, and one of the other girls from Sheila's office on the third. Then it was my turn again. Both Amy and I came in every evening and had dinner together after that. By that time, we already had our own table in a fish and chip store, and a sign appeared on the wall that said no change. Other customers and staff overheard my and Amy's conversations and became involved in Sheila's plight. We did everything we had to do. He played music that Sheila liked, talked to her about everything and everything. I found out that Doug Collins called after he finished his late shift to read Wuthering Heights, Sheila's favorite book. He noticed her battered copy on the bedside table when he searched her apartment for documents. We never found out when or by whom they were stolen from my apartment, but we never found any of them. One morning I thought I was talking to Sheila, but I must have been a little more tired than I thought. Suddenly I heard a hoarse voice saying softly, "Hello, Marty, are you awake yet?" I'm not quite sure what I did then. I know that the table next to me with a cup and saucer on it could hold 6 people, and the noise made the nurses run. I must have said something to Sheila, but I have no idea what it was. The next thing I remember, I was taken out of the room when the doctors arrived. I then began a series of phone calls that led to people arriving in droves. Only they were not allowed into Sheila's room. After a while, the nurse called Amy and me from the waiting room, where everyone had gathered. She said we could see Sheila again. When we got to the door, I stopped and let Amy go first. She walked over to the bed, and I saw Sheila smile at her, and they started talking to each other. I took this as a signal to leave. I did my duty and stayed with Sheila while she was at death's door. Now that my duty has been done, it is time to move on with my life. I went to a fish and chip shop to break the news to them and watched as they put up a sign that said she's awake. Then I went home to pack my things. The last month or so has been an ordeal for me. God, the last few years have been a bloody tension. I wanted to be somewhere else for a while. I have to say that my boss wasn't too impressed when I told him I was going to Spain for a couple of weeks, but he didn't argue. I had been at my friend's villa for a week when Amy showed up. I was curious why she was there. I watched her get out of the taxi. The way she approached the pool where I was sitting let me know that she was not in the best of moods. "What the hell do you think you're playing, Martin Slimane?" she asked, getting close enough for me to hear. "What's your problem? Am I not allowed to take a vacation?" "No, not when your wife needs you. You don't need you." "Wait, Amy, you forget that Sheila is no longer my wife. She divorced me, remember? She decided she didn't need me anymore." "Well, why did you stay with her for 5 weeks while she was unconscious?" "Debt, nothing superfluous, in sickness and health, until the Lord destroyed all this shit." "Don't give me that shit. You love her." "It doesn't matter, Amy, Sheila divorced me. What I feel about her doesn't matter." "Marty, she loves you." "I don't believe in it for a minute. Remember what she did to me." "It wasn't love." "No, it was a confused girl who needed help. Well, she chose someone else to give her that help. She's rich enough now and she'll have a lot of guys willing to help her, don't worry. The fact of the matter is that I am worried. Listen, she loves you and needs you. Why shout at her? Call a killer or confuse her boyfriends when they get obstinate and give her a reason to call me a bastard? Lord, you're mad at Sheila, aren't you? I love her, but in the year we were apart until she had an accident, I think I was happier than I was in the previous 6 years. I can't say that I was happy to be without her. But I didn't walk on eggshells every day because I didn't know what mood she would get out of bed in. But, Marty, Sheila suffered from. Oh, yes, PMT, PMS or whatever you want to call it. But remember, she accused me of trying to kill her. I don't need all this shit in my life. No, it wasn't PMT. Oh, psychiatrists think hormones have made things worse, but they're sure Sheila has probably been suffering from clinical depression since little Katie died. And you know that Sheila's memory of how you tried to kill her was implanted when she was hypnotized. Bollocks, Amy, PMT, PMS, or clinical depression. Who the hell am I supposed to be, a fucking psychiatric nurse or something else? And I will never believe that you can force someone to do something they don't really want to do by hypnotizing them. But now Sheila remembers that evening in detail. She says it was as if she was looking at what was happening and had no control over it. She says she remembers swearing at you and even knew she was opening the wrong door. She says she just couldn't stop what was happening. I don't care anymore. Look, I did my part, I was there when she needed me, now I'm going to live my own life and forget about Sheila. Oh, I wasted my time coming here? Of course. Amy never said goodbye. She just turned around and walked slowly back to her taxi. She stopped and looked at me one more time before getting into the taxi, and then it drove away. I came back from vacation a couple of weeks ago when I got a call from Doug Collins on Saturday morning. He found me in agony packing as I was moving to a small house on the other side of town. He told me that they couldn't track down the character under the pseudonym Tony Pride. They were sure they knew who he was. Apparently, they believed that he was the great-nephew of Sheila's benefactor. But because he was illegitimate, it made it impossible for him to fight for money. Except that there were no other living relatives. Doug asked me why I hadn't gone to Sheila's since I came back, and, well, we had the same argument that I had with Amy. I will not go into this topic. About 6 months later, my lawyer asked me to visit him. He handed me a check for almost £5 million. Obviously, this was my half of Sheila's inheritance. We mutually agreed to split our assets in half when we divorced. Since her great-uncle died before we divorced, Sheila sent me half of the money. With due ceremony, I tore the check to pieces and asked my lawyer to send it back. We repeated the same pantomime at least 5 times before the check stopped coming. The next thing that struck me was the Internal Revenue Service. They sent me a demand to tax £5 million. It took me a lot of effort to convince them that I didn't accept the money. One of the tax inspectors actually said to me, "Are you crazy?" I was there when I married her, but I didn't marry again, I told him. I think he was the one who finally came to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to take the money. Over the next year, I changed jobs. Well, another company was hunting me. There I started everything from scratch and started dating some girls in the office. Nothing serious, once bitten, twice shy and all that shit. One of the girls I dated was a member of the local country club, and she introduced me to golf. Hey, it's been more exercise than I've had in years. I wasn't very good at it, but I liked to play. So I joined the country club myself. I used to play alone, not being very good, I wouldn't show myself too much like that. There are 3 directions, so with an early start in the summer, usually most of the time I was alone on the track, no one was chasing me. One morning I was on the 5th green, hunting for at least one of the balls I managed to shoot down in the woods that day. After looking around for a while and finding 2 balls that were not mine, I had just come out of a small thicket, but not on the wrong side of the 6th tee, when someone on the 6th must have cut a ball that had made a hole in one of them, right on my nose. I was stunned for a couple of minutes and found myself sitting on the ground tending to my nose when the culprit walked over and apologized profusely. "Didn't anyone ever tell you to shout forward before you made the first strike?" I demanded in anger. "I'm sorry, Marty, I didn't know you were so close." Hell, I knew that voice, but for a moment I couldn't or wouldn't hear it. "Who are you?" "I don't see," I demanded. "Don't you know?" the voice asked. Shit. I knew. But I didn't want to know. "I don't see it." "Show me the direction to the clubhouse," I said, rising to my feet. "What about your belongings?" "I will go back with you and carry your clubs for you." "No, don't worry. I'll call one of the caddies to build them for me." "Marty, I can't let you leave like this." "I'll go with you." "No, leave me alone. Haven't you ruined my life enough?" "Marty, I never wanted to treat you so badly." I didn't realize how badly I had behaved towards you until Amy told me when she came back from Spain. "It's all over now, Sheila. Just stay away from my life in the future, okay?" "No, I'm not going to do that, Marty, I love you and believe that you love me." "Well, maybe you don't like me at this particular moment since I just hit you with a golf ball. But I know I can make you love me again." "Oh. I planned that you would catch me here. I'm sorry I hit you. What does it take, woman, to convince you to stay away from me?" "Well, I would advise you to start by trying to get a court order. But since I have enough money to fight you on this issue, all the way to the European Court of Justice, I think you will spend your time on this." Listen, it would be wise if I took you to the club and then, if necessary, to the hospital. Everything else we can talk about later. Well, I'm having that damn dream again. Here she is, as always, bouncing on me. But wait, what's that damn noise? Damn! The children are crying. Don't worry about it, the nanny will take care of them. That's what she paid for, Sheila smiled at me. Life goes on.